Imagine waking up in the dead of winter. No central heating, no insulated boots, no emergency app on your phone. The wind howls outside, snow piles against the wooden door, and the only thing standing between your family and the bitter cold is what you prepared weeks or even months ago. Today we complain when the Wi-Fi goes out during a snowstorm. But in the medieval world, winter wasn't just inconvenient, it was deadly. And yet, these people survived, not through luck, but through strategies carved out of necessity, wisdom, and community. So how did they do it? In this video, we're uncovering forgotten medieval strategies for winter survival, the clever, gritty, and sometimes shocking methods that kept entire villages alive during the most brutal months of the year. From insulation tricks that required no modern tools, to survival foods that could outlast the snow, to herbal cures passed down by firelight, you'll discover ancient techniques that are not just historical curiosities, but relevant lessons for anyone serious about resilience, self-reliance, or just understanding how humans endured before thermostats. Let's step back in time, into a world where winter wasn't a season, it was a gauntlet. Surviving winter in the Middle Ages started long before the snow began to fall. Preparation was everything, and it had to be smart, thorough, and often communal. First, let's talk shelter. Medieval homes weren't insulated like modern buildings, but they had their own clever solutions. Peasants packed walls with wattle and daub, a mixture of clay, straw, and dung that trapped heat surprisingly well. Thatched roofs with thick layers of straw helped seal warmth inside. And when the wind howled through the cracks in timber walls, they plugged them with rags, moss, or even animal fat. In larger households, people slept in tight quarters, often with animals nearby, not just for protection, but for body heat. Every living thing was a heat source. It wasn't cozy, it was calculated survival. Now let's go underground, to the root cellar. These weren't fancy walk-ins with LED lights. They were earth-cooled storage pits that kept vegetables, grains, and fermented foods stable for months. Everything edible that didn't spoil, dried meats, smoked fish, cured cheese, fermented cabbage, was stockpiled. Preservation was an art. Salt, smoke, vinegar, and cold air were the tools of the trade, and none of this happened alone. Winter survival was communal. In small villages, neighbors helped repair roofs, share extra firewood, or combine food stores. They weren't being generous, they were being strategic. One household's failure could ripple through the entire village. So while the rest of the world slept on medieval primitive life, these people were master planners, building their homes and lives with winter in mind. And the cold didn't take them by surprise. They were waiting for it. Forget designer thermals or battery-powered gloves. Medieval people relied on pure logic, layers, and nature to fight off the cold. Let's start with clothes. The average person wasn't walking around in armor, but in carefully layered wool, linen, and fur. Wool was the MVP. It retained warmth even when wet, and when layered with linen undergarments, it created a simple but powerful insulation system. But layering wasn't random. They followed an inside-out strategy: breathable fabric next to the skin, heavier wool on top, and outer layers made from oiled cloth or fur-lined cloaks to block the wind. Wealthier folks might wrap themselves in ermine or fox, but even peasants had access to sheepskin or rough-woven hoods to protect their heads and ears, the key zones of heat loss. And boots? No Gore-Tex here, but stuffed straw or moss inside leather shoes helped trap heat and absorb moisture. Some even wrapped cloth strips around their legs, early thermal leggings. But warmth wasn't just about clothing, it was also about movement. Medieval people knew that staying still was a fast route to frostbite. That's why daily chores didn't stop, even in snow, whether it was hauling firewood, feeding animals, or chopping ice to fetch water. Their routines kept blood flowing and spirits up. And here's something surprising. Medieval people didn't bathe often, not just because of hygiene beliefs, but because less bathing meant less exposure to cold. Wet skin in an unheated home could be dangerous. They cleaned themselves selectively, using cloths and oils, not full immersion. So while today we rely on heated blankets and thermostats, medieval people mastered heat through motion and material. Every layer had purpose, every movement, protection, no luxury, just strategy. Winter in the Middle Ages wasn't just about cold toes and frozen fields. It was also a battle against illness, hunger, and mental fatigue. And without modern medicine, medieval people had to get creative. Fast. Let's talk healing. When the body faltered, herbs were the frontline defense. Villagers kept dried bundles of yarrow, sage, elderflower, and thyme on hand. These weren't just for flavor. They were used in teas, poultices, and steams to ease everything from chest infections to aching joints. One of the most common winter problems? Respiratory infections. Cold, damp air led to coughs that could turn deadly. Their solution? A hot herbal brew with honey, nature's antibiotic. Sometimes they'd even inhale steam from boiling herbs to clear the lungs, a medieval version of a humidifier. For aching muscles and cold-bitten skin, they used animal fat mixed with herbs to create salves. And when food was scarce, even onion or garlic soups doubled as immune-boosting tonics. Now for nutrition. When fresh food was off the table, they leaned hard into preserved, high-calorie staples. Dried beans, salted meats, stored grains, pickled vegetables. Everything had a role. Nothing was wasted. Even the bones from last month's slaughter were boiled for hours into nutrient-rich broth. But food wasn't just fuel. It was psychological armor. Warm meals, even simple porridges, became a morale booster. Many communities had shared meals around a hearth, not just to eat, but to survive emotionally. Stories were told, songs sung. It kept the cold out and the spirit in. And when all else failed, medieval people turned to faith and ritual. Certain blessings and charms were believed to ward off illness, not because they lacked reason, but because they knew the power of belief during desperate times. So, the next time you sip soup on a cold day or light a candle when you're sick, remember, these comforts aren't new. They're echoes of a world where healing was homemade, sustenance was sacred, and every remedy told a story. It's easy to overlook, but mental strength may have been the most crucial survival tool in the medieval winter. Long nights, limited food, and frequent illness didn't just test the body, they tested the soul. Medieval people knew this. They didn't call it mental health, but their traditions and rituals fortified the mind. One of their greatest strengths? Community storytelling. As the winds howled outside, families gathered around the fire. They didn't just sit in silence. They shared legends, family history, riddles, even jokes. These weren't just pastimes. They were tools to pass the time, preserve identity, and fight off hopelessness. Music played a key role, too. Simple instruments like flutes, drums, and fiddles turned into morale lifters. Religious chants or festive songs helped structure time, especially around major winter feasts like Christmas or Epiphany, which offered a psychological checkpoint during otherwise endless cold months. And finally, belief. Faith wasn't just religion, it was survival. People lit candles not just for saints, but for warmth of mind. They believed in divine protection, and that belief helped them keep going. So while today we have light therapy and mindfulness apps, the medieval world leaned on something more primal: ritual, rhythm, and the will to carry each other through. Without insulation foam or modern heaters, medieval people relied on passive architectural genius. They didn't need tech, they had thermal awareness. Most rural homes were built with thick stone or earth walls, which acted as thermal mass, absorbing heat by day and releasing it slowly overnight. Windows were small and shuttered, minimizing heat loss. And the hearth? It wasn't just for cooking, it was the heart of the home. Some houses even used multi-room stacking strategies, where animals lived below the humans. The warmth from livestock rose into the living area above, making use of every precious degree of heat. They placed sleeping quarters above kitchens, or in corners furthest from doors. Bed hangings and canopies weren't decorative, they trapped body heat. Even thatched roofs, often seen as rustic, added thick insulation that outperformed early tile and clay. It's a system of thermal microclimates built into everyday life, a brilliant use of physics long before the term existed. Medieval people didn't have parkas or thermal layers, but they absolutely mastered the science of staying warm through clothing. Layering was the rule. A peasant might wear a linen chemise, undergarment, a wool tunic, a heavier surcoat, and finally a cloak. Wool was the gold standard. It stayed warm even when wet. But it wasn't just about what you wore. It was about how you wore it. Cloaks were wrapped and pinned tightly, doubling as blankets. Fur linings, often from rabbits or foxes, were added at the neck and sleeves. Gloves were rare, but mittens made of boiled wool or even leather were widespread among workers. And for the feet? Thick wool socks paired with leather shoes lined with straw or moss for insulation. Some even added wooden clogs or overshoes to lift their feet from frozen ground. Even their hats were strategic. Coifs and hoods trapped heat around the neck and scalp, which modern science confirms is critical for thermal regulation. No Gore-Tex, no synthetic fleece, just natural fibers, clever tailoring, and centuries of hard-earned wisdom. In the medieval world, you didn't survive winter by luck. You survived by what was on your shelf. Preservation wasn't a side task. It was a seasonal obsession. In autumn, households launched into action, salting meat, drying fruits, smoking fish, fermenting vegetables, and baking dense breads that could last for weeks. Salt was more valuable than gold in some regions, not for taste, but for survival. Salted pork, salted fish, even salted cheese filled cellars. Meanwhile, root cellars kept turnips, carrots, parsnips, and cabbage fresh for months, nestled in straw or sand to prevent freezing. Fermentation was their refrigerator. Cabbage became sauerkraut, milk became cheese, fruits were turned into vinegars or preserved in honey, and then there was pottage, a hearty stew that simmered over the fire, added to daily with scraps and broth. It was hot, filling, and endlessly adaptable. Their food wasn't just fuel, it was strategy. Every preserved item represented a day they wouldn't go hungry, a lifeline through the frost. Winter wasn't just cold, it was dangerous. Predators roamed, food stores were tempting targets, and icy conditions made defense even harder. So medieval communities built with caution and intent. Homes were often grouped tightly together, forming mini fortresses against the wind. Shared walls retained heat, and courtyards protected livestock. Villages built windbreaks, rows of trees or hedges designed to divert cold gales away from the main dwellings. Gates were reinforced, doors were hung with thick animal hides to keep out drafts, and communal grain stores were placed in elevated, secure buildings, protecting them from both moisture and theft. Even religious buildings played a role. Churches were often the warmest and most secure structures in town, offering temporary shelter to the elderly or sick during extreme cold. In short, survival wasn't just about the individual. It was about designing the community to protect itself. So the next time you wrap yourself in a heated blanket, sip cocoa under a thermostat-controlled roof, or curse the cold as you run from your car to your house, pause. Think back to a world where none of those comforts existed, and people still made it through. They didn't just survive the winter, they outsmarted it. Through architecture that trapped warmth, food strategies that defied rot, clothing layered with purpose, and communities built on shared resilience. Medieval people fought winter with fire, fiber, and fierce ingenuity. And here's the kicker. Many of those forgotten strategies still work. In off-grid living, homesteading, prepping, or even in modern sustainable design, you'll find echoes of these ancient systems everywhere. Not because they're quaint, but because they're timeless. So, what do we take away? That the past still holds tools for the future. That comfort is a luxury, but survival is a craft. And that sometimes the smartest ideas come not from what's new, but from what's been nearly forgotten.